Welcome to the Truth Has No Sides podcast. These conversations will be had to expand the minds and the consciousness of you, the listener. If you like the content of the show, please like the video and subscribe to our channel to help this message be seen and heard by more people. Thank you for being here and enjoy the episode. Okay, two red dots. Today's guest is a good friend of mine. We grew up since junior high. We had not spoken for many years. We just, life and everyone moved. The other day, last week, I had to go to the grocery store to grab some stuff before dinner, just a few extra odds and ends and Q-tips. While I was walking through the produce aisle, there was a guy leaning in to get a pre-bag salad. And the first thought was, is that Burkman? Now, looking back at that now, after I looked at that guy, and now I'm thinking about what he looks like, he looked nothing like the man you see on this podcast today. But for some reason, my mind went to, is that Burkman? Didn't think anything of it, went on, got what I needed to get, and then I had an issue, an extra 5 or 10 minutes through a grocery store trying to find Q-tips. So if I ever meet the person who designed grocery stores and put Q-tips where they are, I'm going to be quite upset with them because it's getting incredibly frustrating because I could not find them. So before that grocery store, I went to the pet store and it was busy and anyways, there was some backing up and I was getting impatient and I didn't know why. And I just didn't think anything of it. I finally got out of the grocery store, walked to my car, which was in a different spot than it usually is because it was so busy. And I was driving past a restaurant that's just by the grocery store called Macy's. And what's that restaurant, Josh?
It's called Beaumont Cafe.
So there was a 5-second time frame of if I would have left early, I would have missed him. If I would have left late, I would have missed him. He was walking into that restaurant with his wife and 2 kids. I hadn't spoken to him in years. I wondered if that was him in the grocery store, which with a guy that didn't look anything like him, but my mind went to him. And I crossed paths, saw him, drove off. And I was like, holy shit. I texted him about 5 minutes later, said, you won't believe this. You want to do a podcast? And here we are. So again, we grew up since junior high. Josh, I'm not a big bio guy, so will you kind of let the world know who you are? And you and I will just go off on catching up and going off on tangents and your journey and everything else.
Right. Well, my name's Josh Burkman, and I grew up here in Salt Lake City, Utah. I grew up playing traditional sports. I loved sports. My dad always had us into sports to keep us out of trouble. Played college football, college baseball. And I actually tell this story a lot, and Charlie's in this story. I was playing football at Dixie State. I got All-American down there. And I was transferring from Dixie to the University of Utah because I was going to play my first year, my junior year at the University of Utah. And I was driving home because I was moving back from southern Utah back to Salt Lake. And Charlie called me on the phone. And I had just heard this ad on the radio. And this ad on the radio said, if you think you're the toughest dude in Utah, come sign up for Ultimate Combat Experience. And I was like, did I just hear that? They're having real fights at the bar right now? And it wasn't 45 seconds later that Charlie called me and goes, bro, I just heard this thing on the radio saying that they're having no holds barred fights at the bar. You need to sign up. I was like, dude, I just heard that same ad on the radio. He goes, I got the number for you. You got a pen? I reached over, I got a pen, wrote the number down. I go, I'll call you back, Charlie. I called Mike Stidham, who is the owner of the Ultimate Combat Experience. And that was a Thursday. The next day I showed up at a weigh-in to fight on a Friday, and I had my first professional fight on a Saturday. And we'll get into all of that. But that moment changed my life. I dropped out of school the next week. I thought, I'm going to be a professional fighter. This is the greatest thing I've ever done in my life. And for the next 17 years, I was a professional fighter. I fought in the UFC for 10 years. I was a top 10 fighter in the world for, in and out for 10 years. I retired after 47 professional fights at 37 years old with a lot of back injuries and neck injuries and head trauma and all kinds of stuff. So I spent a couple years, I disappeared, I went and really just spent a lot of time by myself, trying to heal myself, trying to figure out who I was after being a fighter and an athlete for 17 years, and I started to get, I got rid of my headaches, got my body back a little bit. And now I'm 44 years old. I own my own gym. I run a wrestling program. I love to help kids and dads be better dads. And that's my contribute. I'm a teacher now. And like I said, 44 years old, happily married. And I have four kids from 12 to my little boy will be a year old tomorrow. And, that's kind of the bio.
That's awesome. Well,
How
and let's give a little.
crazy that you were the one that called me
Well,
and
okay,
was in
so
that moment, right? And I tell that
that's
story all the time. It's funny.
well, I remember I was on Highland Drive at 5200 South because I was headed to our office, and for some reason I had my mom's little Explorer with the pickup back. The back was a pickup truck. I remember making that call to you, and to give everyone a little background, Josh didn't just go from sports to all of a sudden thinking he should fight. He was fighting. He was the kid that everyone knew in the valley and in the state. If he was running with you and there was a fight, there were going to be problems. So I was a
And
very intelligent. I was a
I
very
didn't
intelligent
start the
person.
fights, but I never let anybody mess with my friends or pick the fights. I never turned one down, that's for sure. I was about
That's
150 and 0 in the streets. And I tell
yes,
people I
yes, you
had
were.
been in 150 street fights. And a lot of people don't believe me, but my friends that hung out with me know that it might have been more than
Yeah,
that.
and I've always joked with people when they say, "I don't go looking for fights." Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah. Josh, and people like him say, I never
Yeah,
go looking for violence. I never go looking for fights. Like, oh, how many fights? 150? Oh, okay.
right.
Well, interesting viewpoint you got there, buddy.
Well, like it's
But
like this. If we were at a basketball game, right, and we were cheering on our basketball team, and Layton High School heard that there were some tough dudes at Cottonwood High School, and they showed up to fight. And then my buddy Scotty gets in an argument with the kids that are there looking for a fight, and I back up Scotty. I'm not saying I was looking for that fight. They're the ones that showed up looking for us.
Scotty. Well, I will tell you that the story I tell with all that is I was always really good with words. So I talked us out of quite a few fights, even though it would be 10-5. It'd be 10 of us and 5 of them, and I'd always figure out some way to talk us out. So I've never thrown a punch. I've never been punched, but I had some tough guys behind me, so I never had to concern myself with that. And I've seen Scotty. We're just our little gyms across from the RSL Stadium, so I've
Oh,
seen
really?
him at some soccer games lately. Yeah, so
Right on.
but yeah,
Right.
um, yeah, yeah. Holy cow, man! Well, let's go into your journey because when we were younger, I think both of us were the same. We neither of us went to church. We weren't Mormon. We weren't atheists. We never talked about it. Um, we were just living life. And I went on my spiritual journey after leaving the company around 30, 31, finding my teacher. And if I remember correctly, and I may be reading this wrong, but when you began fighting, it was one thing. But I remember about halfway through your career, you would win a fight and you would start thanking God, or you'd start thanking Jesus, or you were more vocal about your journey. So will you tell me how growing up, what was it like? What changed? Why did it change? Just let's go from there.
Right. Well, so I think that my dad, he was wild when I was young. He was wild growing up. I think it's important to know where you come from, right? So that you know who you are. I think genealogy and those things is really important. And I have a grandpa on my dad's side who was from Chicago, and he bootlegged alcohol for Al Capone. When the prohibition was going on, they started robbing banks. Um, he robbed a bank and ran over two cops and killed them. And so they put him in prison for the rest of his life. He spent 12 years in Juliet
Hmm.
prison before they let him out in those, basically, they let different groups out of prison to go fight in the war. And like they call them the Dirty Dozen, which is the movie, but they did dozens and dozens and dozens
Hmm.
of inmates, and they would let them out. And so my grandpa got a full pardon to go out and fight in World War II. He fought in Invasion of Normandy, the Battle of the Bulge. He got shot 2 times, Purple Hearts. All, and that's my grandpa on my dad's side. He came to Utah, and he met my grandma. And my grandma was a Carlson, and they were a very prominent LDS family in Utah. Her great grandfather settled Wheeler Farm, was a pilgrim, with the Mormons from Illinois to across the Western Mountains into Utah, helped settle Utah, and so she was a very Mormon, like righteous living, good living person. There's a strong like LDS history from my dad's mother. So I have this gangster side to me, and I have this like Mormon side to me on my dad's side. And I think that my dad always had a little of that too. So my dad always wanted us to he wanted us to go to church. So from the age of about 11 till about 15, 16, we would go to church, LDS church, and
Okay.
he just saw a lot of like kids going this way and kids going this way. And he's like, the church for you guys is I just want you to know about God. I want you to know about prayer. And he'd already taught us prayer. He had already taught us about God, but not in a way of religion. And so, and I loved going to church. I loved the activities behind it. I loved learning about God. I read the scriptures when I was 14 years old and was like, this was awesome. And then my dad named me Joshua and my brother Jared out of the book of Joshua in the Bible. So I'm named Joshua after the book of Joshua. And my dad always made sure that I knew that. And always was like, read the book of Joshua, read the book of Joshua, which is, one of the greatest generals and in the history in the scriptures. And so at 16 years old, I had read the book of Joshua. And so that was always instrumental, like in my life, right? And so I think God was always a big part of my life. Prayer was always a big part of my life, and even when my parents got divorced. So my parents got divorced when I was 18 years old. I had never drank, I had never smoked, I had never had sex, I had never done any of those things because of the way that I wanted to live my life and the way that I wanted to strengthen my life force and the person that I wanted to be. I wanted to focus on sports. I didn't want women distracting me. I didn't want partying distracting me, any of that stuff. So then when my parents got divorced, all of a sudden I had no curfew, nobody looking out for me. And some of my friends liked to drink, liked to party, liked to smoke. So I started to stay out later, started to drink a little bit. And this was definitely around you because we'd end up super drunk at your house at 2 in the morning. Gotta sleep somewhere, Charlie. You
I would
know,
be sober. I wasn't drinking until I was 21.
right? And so, um, then my life just kind of like I started to party a little bit, started to drink a little bit. Getting into the UFC didn't help any of that, right? Like, so when I was 23 years old and I really started to like focus on fighting, I moved to Oregon. And I moved to Oregon just to train martial arts, just to like focus. I lived in, and I did this. Let me go back a little bit because this is really important to like where we're going with spirituality and the journey in God. When I was 22 years old, I was living with some of my friends, and I had just won 9 fights in a row. So that first fight that we were talking about, I lost that fight and I got armbarred. And I was like, how did that dude just beat me? Whatever that is that he beat me with, I need to go learn that. And it was jujitsu. So I started training jujitsu nonstop. And I won the next 9 fights in a row. But the fights were in bars. And so people would, after the fights, would be like, dude, let's have some drinks. Hey, let's party. There were drinks around, party favors around, all kinds of stuff, right? And I started to really enjoy partying and being wild, right? So I would fight and I would party. Charlie would come to my fights, watch me fight, and he'd be like, I'm not sticking around for the party. Peace out. Good job. Here's some lanyards to hand out. and and that's what I'll never forget, Charlie. You were one of the first people that really supported me and believed in me, but supported me in a way that you, as a business owner, as me creating my own business, as me becoming not a businessman but a business myself. You were a big influence in that for me, because nobody else around me was doing that for me. They just wanted to be around me because we were going to the coolest parties. And
Mm-hmm.
I'll always respect you and love you, but that was never your role in my journey. And so 22 years old, it's almost the end of the year, and I said, God, why am I like this? Like, why am I built like this? I've been in 100 and whatever fights. I've never got a black eye. Nobody's ever hurt me. I've been in rollovers where my trucks rolled 7 times and my friends were hospitalized and I walked out of there not hurt. And I really wanted to ask God, like, what is this? And so I started drinking. I did a ton of drugs. One night, I did a lot of cocaine, almost an 8 ball. And you actually know who I got all those drugs from, because it was my roommate that lived with me that worked with you. And we were downstairs in the basement, and I told everybody, I said, I can do every bit of that, and it won't even touch me. And everybody was like, yeah, yeah. So we broke it up into 2 lines. And I did half, and then I did the other half. And I think everybody was just like, man, we're about to watch Josh die. And it wasn't even that I liked the drugs. It was that I wanted to know, why am I here? And why am I like this? And why don't some of these things affect me like they do other people? And I went upstairs and I told everybody, I'm not even touched, but I'm going to go up and go to bed. And I really think that my friends were around me at that moment, thought I was about to go upstairs and die. And I went upstairs, and that was, I think, a Friday night. I slept all day Saturday, all day Sunday, and pretty much all day Monday. I never woke up. I went into a form of a coma, right? As I was in this coma, I had a vision, right? I had one of the most profound experiences of my life. And I came out of my body and I looked at my body and I was just like, what is going on? And I had this angelic being take me on this experience. I found out, my dad was doing pain pills. I found out I was shown so much about the human body, how we live, and how it affects the spirit in the body, right?
Mm-hmm.
And on a Tuesday, my dad came and knocked on my window in the upstairs and banged on it and was like, Josh, Josh. And I literally came back into the body and sat up and went to my front door and I was like, what's up, Dad? And he goes, where have you been? Your brother can't get a hold of you. Nobody's seen you. We don't know what's going on. I go, I don't know. What day is it? And he's like, it's Tuesday morning. And I said, Dad, I went to bed Friday night and I'm just getting out of bed. And my buddy Nick Sturry was living with me at the time, and he had come over by my room, and my door was like cracked, and he looked in, but he said he couldn't go in my room. He wasn't able to go in my room. He, by Monday, he probably thought I was dead, but he didn't, but he couldn't go in my room, right?
Mm-hmm.
And after that experience, I gave all my stuff away, gave my TV away, my clothes, all my stuff. I packed one bag. So then I got a fight. Actually, I got a fight to go fight in Oregon against a guy named Matt Horwich. And it was 2 weeks after this experience that I was talking about. And I said, and when my dad took me to the hospital, he took me to the doctor. And the doctor that he took me to, when he came and picked me up, was the stake president of a Mormon church, right? And I went in and he's like, hey, we're going to do some blood tests on you. We're going to check on some things. I said, okay, but listen, my blood test is going to come back and it's going to come back with all kinds of drugs and things in it. And he had this really like cool, profound talk with me, right? And he gave me a blessing at the end of this doctor's appointment. My dad came in, and on the way home, that's when the guy called me and offered me the fight. And so 2 weeks later, I went out. I hadn't trained in a month. I was partying hard. I was going through that experience of putting myself into that place that, I wanted to just, I was on a little bit of a vision quest through the things that I was doing. And so I took that fight. I went to Oregon. I lost that fight. And this kid was a little autism, a little on the spectrum, but he was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Matt Horwich, if you know who Matt Horwich is, one of the better fighters that there was at the time. And Matt Horwich beat me. I came home and I packed a bag with fighting gear and I packed a bag with some other clothes in it. And I got in my car, gave up all my stuff, and I moved to Oregon. And, I lived in a hotel for a minute, but I went to train with this Team Quest, because there was a guy named Randy Couture here. Randy Couture was the world champion. And when I went into this room, this was the toughest room I had ever seen in my entire life. Not to mention it was the best team in the country at the time, probably in the world, Team Quest.
Yes.
And go ahead.
No, you had Randy, you had Matt Linlin, you had Dan Henderson, you had Horowitz, you had
Evan Tanner, Chris Lieben.
Oh my God, man! I remember going up to Oregon and watching a couple of your fights. I mean, it was just to see all of those guys outside of the UFC and then into the UFC front row. I mean, it was incredible. It was awesome. What a I mean, right? What do they say? Iron sharpens iron.
Iron sharpens iron. Yeah.
Wow.
And so when I moved there, towards the end of that experience, my buddy Robert Rovita had left, and I stayed in our attic apartment, and I lived with a desk, a bed, and scriptures. I read the scriptures. I trained 3 times a day, and a year and a half later, I was in the UFC. And, the reason I tell that story in the way that I tell that is God and spirituality was always a part of what I was doing. But when I lost that first fight, I laid in the middle of the ring. And when I laid in the middle of the ring, I feel like I was so exhausted. I had no thoughts. I could just lay there. And sometimes when you're that empty and that exhausted, like it's easier for God to communicate with you. And I feel like I had this vision. And the vision was stop playing football and be a martial artist and dedicate your life to martial arts. And that was that when I lost my first fight. And I went in the back, and when I went in the back, I dry heaved a couple times, and I laid back down. And I feel like I was listening to God, and God was telling me, your purpose is to be in martial arts. It's going to teach you things that are going to save your life and dedicate your life to this, which is why I dropped out of school, gave up football, and started pursuing martial arts in the way that I did. And then that vision that I had when I fell asleep for 3 days, but it's probably a drug-induced coma. That vision tied to that first experience that I had when I laid in the middle of the ring and decided to change my life. Except for during the 3 days, I got to see my path forward. And I got to see how choices in your life affect you, affect your health, affect, and how nutrition and those kind of things benefit you. And for the next, this has paved my path in my life to where I am now. Because those same things that I had the vision about at 22 years old is the man who I am and who I'm becoming now. I just didn't, it's almost like I had to go through that struggle of the warrior and the fighter to get to the place where I am now at 44 years old. I'm more of a martial artist at 44 years old than I was at 28 years old fighting in the UFC.
Yep. Yeah. So you kept that pretty close to your chest, because I had no clue about any of that. I wasn't in your life like some of the friends were, but there was me doing what I was doing, but your friends were there for partying and everything else. But I'm sure that was more of a a silent thing for you that you did in the background, which is incredible to hear, which is a perfect story to be told, because you basically had that near death experience, out of body experience, and you were given an image of that. And that out of body experience and near death experience is becoming such a common theme because more people are comfortable to talk about it.
Right.
Because I mean, back then, if you talked about that, there was a lot of people that were put into psych wards. They were
100%.
terrified. I mean, if you're, especially in Utah, if you're a Mormon, you say, "Hey, I had an out of body experience and I heard voices
Right.
and an angelic being." They'd be like, "Oh my God, we gotta figure this
Right.
out. We'll talk to
Right.
the bishop."
Yeah,
So,
and the thing that I tied that to was stories in the scriptures, right? Like people had similar stories like that in the scriptures, right? Like and spiritual beings had not spiritual beings, but like human beings had spiritual experiences like that,
mhm.
even like, and I would not, I wouldn't tie my experience to Moses' experience, but Moses had an experience like that where he saw God and got the commandments. And I 100% believe that humanity has been had those visions and experiences through men and women that have helped them in their personal journeys, but also helped humanity as a whole. And I've shared that story with almost everybody that's close to me, my mom, my dad, my brother. But I've only think I've told it like in a way like this where other people are going to hear it, one other time, and now as I get older, I'm more sure of what I've learned and what I saw, how that affects my life, and how I use that as a teacher to others.
Well, and the most interesting part of what you just brought up is that those stories are in the scriptures. So you would think that all the people reading that book, experiencing that, seeing that in written form, would have an easier time sharing it and talking about their own experiences. But I think that comes down to levels of consciousness because they'll read that story and they can only understand it at their level of understanding. So they may
Right.
think it's like, oh, that's a cute story, or wow, that's a great fable, when it's in actuality, it's a real thing. And it's very common right now. It's
Right.
a
Well,
big
and it's a
deal.
real, yeah, and it's a real thing that we're all capable of having. And it's
Oh
actually
yeah.
a really important time to live your life in a way. And when I use righteousness, I just mean right living, right? And right living it might be different to different people's, but like right is don't lie, don't steal, don't cheat, right? Like, and then if I look up at my dojo right now and we have virtues on the wall, and it's the first one's integrity, which is, just being honest with yourself and others, right? And to me, like this is righteousness. And then respect, treating people good, like, being kind, having manners, then courage, then compassion, honor, honesty, loyalty. So those are the 7 virtues in the gym, and we teach living in that way so that you're centered, right? And when you're centered, everything's a little bit more balanced, right? And then what we're talking about is I think it's important for us to live in this way that we can use prayer to find guidance and personal revelation during this time. Because, I don't think that the leaders of churches and the leaders of these political leaders have the best interest for us ourselves as people, right? I think we need to figure out for ourselves through prayer, through personal revelation, through these visions, what is best for us and how we need to move forward in our own lives for success and safety. And so I think that, like you're saying, yeah, it's happening to a lot of people. It's like I live my life the way that I live my life so that I can go to God and seek guidance, and I do that more at this point in my life than maybe ever before. But I don't know about that because it's been like that for the last 15 years. I'm getting better and better at it. And I think when you're talking about that period of time when I came back, so at 29 years old, I had herniated disc in my neck. It was pushing on my spinal cord. I went to the 2 surgeons. They both had told me your career's over. You need to retire. I had been top I was number 7 in the world right before I had lost these last couple fights because of my injuries. So at 29 years old, finally starting to make some decent money. Now the doctors told me my career's over. And I went home. I was living in Las Vegas at the time. And I went home after I visited with the doctors in Salt Lake, and I went back to Vegas. And when I got home, I got out of my car, I got on my knees, and I just sat next to my bed, and I said a prayer for about a half hour. And I apologized for the way that I had been living my life, partying, not taking care of myself. Because during my career from 25 to 29, when I was in the UFC, I would take 9 weeks and I would be super focused. I'd be like a samurai. I would eat good. I would go to bed early. I wouldn't party. But as soon as that fight was over, I would go out with my friends, and all of a sudden I'd have a drink. Then I'd have 2. Then I'd have 12. And then it was 2 weeks later and I was still partying, right? And so at 29, I was on my hands and knees, like asking for forgiveness and more, probably forgiveness from myself, because this was the prime of my life. And I don't feel like I could have done more, and I was going to have a lot of regret, and I was going to have a lot of, if I didn't get another chance. And so, I what I did is, that I went to yoga after I said my prayer. And when I went to yoga, my buddy Dre was there, and he said, "Hey, I have a lady that wants to help you. She knows about your injuries. She's the founder of the Nevada Institute of Sports Science, and she thinks that she can help you." So I went and talked to her, and I talked to her for 2 hours, maybe 3 hours. She's got a clinic full of people. She's passing her clients off to, other doctors. And she basically said, "I can help you, but you're going to need a sports psychologist. You're going to have to not drink alcohol. You're going to have to go to bed at 11 o'clock. You're going to have to wake up at 8 o'clock. You're going to have to create this vision board. And you're going to have to do yoga every day. You're going to have to drink alkaline water, 9.5 alkaline water that we're going to get for you. And we're going to put you on a raw food diet. So you have to stop having sugar, meat. Everything's going to be live, raw food." And I was like, let's do it. So, I did this. I lived this way for 9 months. I didn't go out. I didn't see very many people. 29 years old, living in Las Vegas, extremely focused. But prayer, she asked me about my relationship with God, and she asked me about prayer. And I told her my relationship with God's very important, probably the most important relationship I have. And I pray often. I feel like that's how I found you, or how you found me. And she was like, perfect, because I think that's a important tie to what we do. And so, and in my prayer, I just asked God for my career back. I asked him for my health back. I said that I didn't feel like I had lived the life that I was supposed to live. Go back to 22 years old, going into that coma for 3 days and having the out-of-body experience. The being that came to me told me that we all have these powers, right? And these things that I was about to be shown weren't special to me, but I was being able to see them. And it was that the way we eat really affects us. And then I got to go and oversee what was happening at my brother's house. And he was drinking pop and he was eating chips. And, I could see how the way that you eat and what you're doing with your life, how your body wants to reside inside a strong vessel. But if you drink alcohol, or if then your spirit resides a little bit outside of the vessel. It can't be fully centered in the vessel. And I was told, right, that, and I say this reluctantly because it's exactly that, like how people think that we think these things happen to us, right? But I don't now. I was told that no man would ever beat me if I lived righteously. That no man would take me out. And when I lived my life in a way, Charlie, that I was lined up and I was living righteous and not partying and not drinking, and just living wholesomely in the way of a martial artist, nobody ever beat me, right? I always beat myself because of the things that I was doing outside of training. So and that's why my career was up and down. I was the baddest dude in the world. I would train with Randy Couture, Matt Lindland, all those guys, and those guys would be like, dude, I can't believe how good you are. Like, you're going to be a world champion. And I probably would have been if I could have lived in a little bit more alignment with what a martial artist needed to do. But instead, I had a buddy. Go ahead.
More consistently. Yep.
Yeah, consistency is key, right? And I had a buddy, Jackson Vroman, that got drafted by the Suns and hung out with celebrities and the best parties, and I loved being a part of that stuff. For me, fighting was supporting our partying, not cultivating who I was, at least at that point in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the end of this study that they did on me, they did this case study on me, and I was doing a lot of stuff with this guy named Dr. Bosharon, which is vision, and the vision, how it affects the neural pathways and how it affects the spinal cord. But at the end of this 9 months, I basically had healed myself. They did another MRI. My herniated discs were gone. My VO2 max was high. I was in peak shape, and then they told me to go out and drink and party and stay up late for 2 days. So, it took me 9 months to get my health back, but there was this 3 weeks that helped me get into peak shape before we did these tests. And then I went out and partied one night, had a couple drinks, stayed up late till 3 a.m. The next night, had a few more drinks, stayed up a little later, felt terrible.
Mm-hmm.
The music from the clubs would shake my brain, threw off my equilibrium, made me feel weird because I was living like a monk for 9 months, right? Yeah. And then all of a sudden I went out, drank, partied, 29. Well, that 3 weeks that it took me to get in peak shape was ruined in 2 nights of going out and partying.
Yeah.
And having a couple of drinks. And then she's like, when you drink, it's poison, right? It pulls essential oils from your brain, from your spine. And that essence, that life force, that essence is the hardest thing to build. And when it's gone, it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And so you shouldn't do the things, you're a NASCAR, and you should treat your body like that, right? And I took that to heart. I took that as a vision. I took that whole experience as a gift from God. And I came back. I won, 11 of 12 fights. I got back into the top 10 in the world. The peak of that experience was I got a rematch with this guy named John Fitch. And the first time I fought John Fitch, I was ranked number 7 in the world, and he wasn't ranked. And I went out to Scottsdale before my fight because I had broke my foot 3 weeks from the fight. I went out to Scottsdale. My buddy Jackson was there. My other buddy was out there. We went out, drank a little bit, smoked a little weed because my foot was hurt. I had all the excuses. John Fitch whooped my ass in 2007. He beat me up worse than anybody's ever beat me up in my life. He's the only one that's ever really beat me up. And he beat me, I believe, at the end of the second round. I don't know exactly what it was, and he choked me. And I had a big black eye. So my goal was to never have any regrets, to not have resentments about my career so I could move forward in a way that I was proud of the career that I had. So in 2000, I don't even know, 15, I rematched John Fitch. I had been living my life a certain way, no partying, very focused martial artist. And this is what you were talking about earlier in the interview. God was a huge part of my life. I would wake up and meditate, pray, ask God, for guidance, thank him for giving me my health back. Thank him for my beautiful kids, my family, and then with this fight with John Fitch, I went out and beat John Fitch in 41 seconds. The referee couldn't even get in to stop it. I let him down. I put my hand in the air as just gratitude for man, this is who we can be when we live our life right and we live our life through God. And that was what that moment was when I beat John Fitch, was the example of who I was and how I was living my life. And I just beat one of the baddest dudes in the world, the number 3 ranked fighter in the world, in the most dominant way in 41 seconds. And it had nothing, it just had to do with the way I was living my life. That fight and the fights previous to that were just an example of how I was living. And it was an spiritual expression in the cave and one of the greatest moments of my career, you know? And it's kind of like, I almost feel like that was the end of my career. It wasn't, because I started getting paid more money after that fight and I wanted to, but my heart had changed and my ego had changed. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't like I wanted to prove to people that I was the baddest dude in the world anymore. Like, I had found the answers and the proof that I had needed to move through my ego into a more mature masculine self, right? And that was I was 35, 36 years old. And then those weren't the end of my, lessons and things, but that was the culmination of the greatest moment in my career as a fighter.
Yeah, I remember watching that fight, and I was talking to a buddy of mine last night. I got back into playing soccer. I didn't know uh, how seriously adults took soccer until I found this club and how many leagues there are and how many levels. And like, when I just got off, I'm 6 months off ACL because some kid took me out. Like, these are good players. And
It gets serious.
yeah, it does. We had our club party on Saturday, and everyone was, doing what they're doing. And as I usually do, I drop out early, right? Sober as can be. And I saw him last night at futsal. I'm just kind of watching because of my knee. I got a couple more months before I can play. And he's talking about alcohol. And I'm like, alcohol is the absolute worst thing you can do for your body. He's like, well, no. I'm like, yes. He's like, no, heroin and all this. I'm like, no, your body needs water to live. Alcohol is sucking your body dry of water, shutting down your organs, and you wonder what, like, it's just natural for people to have a hangover. So when you talked about the 9 months and the 3 weeks into that VO2 max and you're in top shape, and they asked you just to prove to you how shitty you're going to feel after feeling as
Right.
good as you did, that is like the fish in water. Hey boys, how's the water? What is he talking about water? The drinking, the smoking, and not on a high level, not on an addictive level, just normal life, because almost
Yeah.
every advertisement is a beer or liquor commercial other than a drug commercial. And
Right.
everyone's just having the time of their life. It's, we're just having a beer after work. And it's become so commonplace because of marketing and advertisement and the conditioning we've been given. It is the
Right.
absolute worst thing you can do for your body, and it's just
Right.
normal. So they don't know, feeling shitty is not feeling shitty to them. That is normal. To someone
Right.
who has understood the other side of it, when they do drink and they feel just like they're on death's door just because of one simple night,
Right.
that that's normal to people. And I think more people are waking up to understanding that it's a terrible thing. It's a horrible thing,
Right.
and
Yeah.
it's no longer, I just need to relax. I need to take the edge off. I just want to have a drink with my friends. There's always an excuse to everything like that, and it's horrific. And I
Yeah.
have no problem with people doing it. I don't give a shit. I don't give a shit
Right.
what you.
Yeah. People can
But
do what they want to do to be happy, right?
so
There's an
bad for the
understanding.
body. It's so
Yeah.
bad for the body.
So one of the ways that, right, like I like to explain, like, alcohol when I'm asked, is that, so essential oil, everybody knows about essential oil, doTERRA. We want essential oil for this or for that, right? Like, it's that essential um, nutrient inside an herb, a plant, whatever, right? And the way that we extract the essential oil from the herb or from the flower is we put it with alcohol. And then that alcohol separates the oil from the vessel or the plant. And then you pull the essential oil out. And the alcohol does the same thing to the human body, right? It wants to pull that life force, that essential oil, out of important parts of the brain or the spinal cord, right? Now it pulls that out of the brain, but then there's a way that it works back. And that's what you're doing to yourself. You're depleting your life force and your essential oil, and for me, I want that to thicken. I want that to thicken to give me energy, to give me that's what I call spirit, right? Energy to be able to live life. And I think that when we do that, the spirit wants to live in a wholesome vessel, and it's not pure and it's not clean when you add those things to it. So the spirit resides outside of the body, and it just doesn't as easily communicate with us, and so I think that that essential oil, like, analogy is very close to what it does to us. And then Al Ghul Hall, right? Like when the spirit resides outside of the body, different deities and energies can possibly enter the body. And that's what I believe is when your spirit doesn't reside fully in your body, then it opens up space and crisis for demons to be able to come in and exist there when you're not of a sober mind. And I think we see a lot of that in society, even with this Diddy stuff going on, man. These Diddy parties and people losing their minds. I think there's a lot of demons and ghouls that are existing around those spaces, and I think it's important. I think that's a little crazy talk, but I think people are also waking up to that might be reality.
It, we say that just because of the conditioning. We make a comment like you just did, and we say, kind of sounds woo woo, or it might be crazy.
Right.
No, this planet is shifting in consciousness, and luckily, it has nothing to do with you, me, or any of the other 8 billion people. Because if we were left up to our own devices, you see what we would do with it. So there's
Right.
that natural shift of consciousness, which is before creation is destruction, and more people are waking up to see things more clearly. So those comments you're making are being heard more. It's becoming
Right.
part of the conditioning, but it's becoming a conditioning that awakens people to why they feel bad. The
Yeah.
doctor says I'm fine. My blood's fine. Why do I feel like shit? I don't drink. I don't smoke. There's a lot of things that are still going on. There's so many things because you just nonchalantly talked about an angelic being in a near death out of body experience. So what I love about this podcast is, like you said, I've shared this with my friends, close people, but not in
Right.
public. It's becoming more of a public thing. And I have a lot of people who cross my paths who, for some reason, like to share those stories. And I don't think there's ever been a person in the last couple of years I've crossed paths with that didn't have something crazy to talk about because they felt
Right.
comfortable because they read my book or saw my story or understand that I've seen it with my teacher. I've seen it all. I've seen people do incredible things. I know people who can see things. I know people who can levitate. So they're okay, comfortable talking about it. And they all
Right.
hear voices. They see beings. They see different dimensions. They see time slow down. They have experiences. They had out of body experiences. They can go above their body. They go above their house. They go above the planet. They see how
Right.
big this universe is. They see how big just our galaxy is. They understand that when we watch 60 Minutes and some astrophysicist is talking about maybe there's other life, we're still maybe. I mean, they're all over this planet. They're here
Right.
all the time. They've been here forever. Where do you think we came from? And there's just in our galaxy, it's 100,000 light years. We only know of 4 or 5,000 other planets that are like ours in a number of 400 billion. It's just insane. There's so much more going on. So I love that you're
Right.
sharing the story and everything else. So
And there's only so much, right? Like as an human experience, the average person, there's only so much that we see. But
oh wow, so
there's
limited.
so much there's there's so much more going on that we don't see, and I think it's just a really important time for us to be able to protect our bodies, our minds and our spirits, and I think protecting your body and your mind is those layers to really being able to get in and protect your spirit, the essence of who we are, right? That divine energy that's in me, that's in you. And I think the more that we can get inside ourselves and feel that, hear and see that still small voice, right? That it's just when the more able the more capability we have to guide ourselves through these times, And I think that that's what me as a teacher, I try to teach at our dojo, right? Is practices and principles behind living the way, right? The way that guides you to the divine source inside yourself that's in everything that's living.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that, like you said, there's also a lot that is trying to guide us away from that. There's a lot of that's trying to pull us the other way. The light and the dark are lining up, and like I think, there's a wildly beautiful battle and destruction happening. Um, for me, what I believe is the highest good.
Well, and the craziness that we see, the intensity we see, the division, the conflict we see, is because of how much more we're moving towards the light, towards the good. We're waking up to how bad things have been. So whatever that dark side is, the darkness, the demons, whatever, they're in a last ditch effort. I mean, I always talked about that in a decade, and that was a little 5 years ago. In a decade, we're going to be embarrassed how we were with social media. We are going to be
Right.
absolutely embarrassed that we would talk about what we ate, where we were, what we were doing when people were struggling, how much money we had, pictures of ourselves,
Right.
selfies. It's embarrassing, and it's incredible much how that still has a stranglehold over us, and how they're trying to still manipulate that algorithm to keep us on there. Because that, you talk about a drug, because that's the toughest one. Like alcohol, it's advertised that it's okay, so people drink.
Right.
Cocaine and heroin and all these other drugs are something we need to get off of, but it's okay for us to have a harder addiction on our phones and scrolling and social media and what's everyone doing and texting. And it puts a pit in my stomach every
Right.
time I think about that. um,
Yeah, I think that what it's created is everybody wants to be seen because um, everything might be it, the the way I look at it is the more people want to be seen. This is why I stopped doing podcasts. I just like no, I can't do them anymore. Like because the more people want to be seen, the more I want to disappear. You know what I mean? The more I want to be up on my property, the more that I want to kind of just get away. But I also know that's not my purpose as a teacher right now. Or else I would be up in my mountain in my tiny house, wandering my land with my wife all the time, right?
mhm,
And I think that there is this battle of spirits going on, right? And I think even if we, with the thing that's going on with like Diddy, it's a distraction, but
mhm,
it's also showing us that like people are willing to give up their bodies and people are willing to give up their spirits for fame, for
mhm,
attention.
mhm,
And I think we're going to see more of that as like people are like, yes, if you give me this role to this movie, I'll give you my body. If you give me um, more money to have from my record sales, I'll give you my body, right? And giving up that body is giving up that spirit, right? And that ability to lock into your center, right? To me is what enlightenment is, right? A light mind and a light body, right? So I don't have these hard, heavy thoughts holding me down of what I did or didn't do. Um, and I think when we find that lightness, it's easier to go inside and find that guidance, right? And I hope, I really hope, like what you're saying, within 10 years, we look back and be like, man, this is what most social media was about. This is what, these video games, it was to bring everybody into this matrix, right?
mhm.
And I hope we're still having a human experience in 10 years. My fear is that now with the new 5G and the frequencies that are going on, that addiction is more. And it's going to make having a human experience less enjoyable.
Mhm.
And so the way you hide the human experience is you put the helmet on. And then you can go to work and you can do your meetings and you can find your entertainment, you can watch your movie, and you can have this whole experience with this helmet on. And I think the robot technology is pretty wild. I think the 5G and the meta is pretty wild. And I just think, I really hope in 10 years we're still able to have this human experience where we see each other, love each other, wrestle each other, fight each other, get dirty, play, hunt. Because I think that's what the human experience is about, is the physicality and the emotion. And I just, it'll be really interesting to see, you know, where this like battle of light and dark or whatever it is might be part of the human experience. But to me, it's a fascinating time to be alive and a really important time to take care of your physical, mental, and spiritual health.
Well, two things. Authenticity and the human experience and where we came from. First of all, authenticity. I've talked about this a lot because they've done studies, and you know, all the teachers I've learned from, Adi Ashanti, my teacher, Nisargadatta, they all talk about the highest frequency being love. Well, they've actually done studies, and the highest frequency is authenticity. So as I've listened to you speak, that has been in the back of my mind, because authenticity is Steve Jobs doing what he did. Some people thought he was a complete asshole. Authenticity is Josh Burkman doing what he did. Something I'm always working on, to be more my authentic self, to click in, knowing when I'm my authentic self, that heaviness goes away, the problems go away. But authenticity, and that authenticity includes love, includes hate, it includes the entire human experience and whatever your soul signed up
Yeah.
for. Authenticity, and it's different for 8 billion different people.
Right.
The other thing is the human experience. So you talked about hunting and fighting and being dirty and just living and putting points on the board, as another friend of mine says, just dancing and swimming and ups and downs. When you listen to a Darius Wright or these other people talk about out-of-body experiences, and now they can do them on call, they can do them once a week, and they learn what you've learned, right? This is millions and millions of people all talking about the same stuff. Well, we came from a realm where everything was beautiful. Everything was perfect. You manifested anything you want just by a thought, whatever you wanted to do, right? And we came here to understand what we were not. We came here to experience the ups and downs, because there are no ups and downs where we came from. So I've always thought it was interesting that even myself, how aggressively I went down my spiritual path, thinking enlightenment was the end journey. And it's not, right? It's the human experience. That's the only reason we're
Yeah.
here, because we had enlightenment. And apparently we got bored to come into the physical form and get our teeth kicked in.
Yeah.
To
What
go
if nothing
through,
goes wrong?
yeah, right. I mean, that's all we hear. If someone crosses over, they talk about feeling more at home. They talk about the love they felt, the peace they felt. Even Darius talks about how it's more physical on the other side than it is here. I mean, you talk about a mind fuck. We think this is the physical form. He talks about that it's more physical on the other side. But many people who have that choice, probably just like you were given, do you want to stay with us or do you want to go back? And many people go back because they came here to experience. And all of those experiences built Burkman into a 44-year-old man. Like you said, it was very interesting that you said, I'm more of a martial artist now than I was when I was fighting, because of the whole persona, the whole understanding, the clarity of who you are with your wife, your kids, people who you teach, not just a mixed martial artist in the cage as a profession. So it's incredible how we expand off that. And that's something I'm getting better at, is being okay with the tough experiences, the struggles, because that's
Right.
what brought me to this podcast. It brought me to some really good ideas that if I wasn't pushed or pressured, I would have probably just sat back and not done anything about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I like all those thoughts. I think tying the authenticity, right? Like, I think once you find your purpose, whichever route you go about that, and you kind of stay on purpose, then it helps you to be a little bit more authentic. But when you start looking at the world and the social media and getting into that comparative success, that sometimes takes us out of it. And then you just got to kind of get yourself, back on purpose. I think, that's what I was saying. Once I got through the ego, trying to prove I was the baddest dude in the world, wanting people to know, we're looking over injuries and this and that. Once I got through that ego and was like, what I feel like I did is I served my ego. And so I was able to kind of sit back and relax and go, oh, all these hard things that I've been through is everything I want to teach this younger generation to be able to deal with so that they can have persistence to get those through those things, to be resilient, right? And just going back to like, what's my purpose? How can I just be authentically me? Not tied to this religion, not tied to this art. How can it all just kind of serve me to help me be the best version of myself? And for me at this point now, I truly want to help others. I truly want to, serve others and add to. I have a quote up here on my wall, and it's the Dalai Lama, and it says, "We're all here for 99, 100 years at the most. And while we're here, we should do something useful with our lives. And if we contribute to the happiness of others, we'll find the true meaning of life." And the more that I do that and the things that I do, the more that, happiness and abundance is around me, and that for me is me staying on purpose, and the more that I do that, the more that I can try to be, my most authentic self, and I think that's exactly it, man. We all go through hard times, right? But you work through those hard times. It's like school. It's like if you want to go from third grade to fourth grade to fifth grade to sixth grade, you have to pass the tests. You have to, learn the information. And I think that's it. We're all just going through these different levels and different tests to try to, have that full human experience, to where if we can get out of that immature masculine into that, at least for me as, as a man, get through that immature masculine, get through my ego, become a more mature masculine, where my relationship is better with God, better with my dad, better than with myself than it's ever been. Does that mean I don't have struggle and hard things that I have to deal with? No. I'm dealing with one of the toughest things that I've had to deal with in a while with my kids. 12-year-old son wanting to rebel against his dad, wanting the path of least resistance. And when I just go back into prayer, I go back into my authentic self, I know this is just another one of those struggles that's helping me become, the father and the teacher, that I want to be, and going back to the scriptures and, the book of Joshua, my dad naming me after the book of Joshua. It always goes back to, be afraid and not dismayed, for the Lord thy God is always with you, and at 44 years old, man, I turned to God for guidance more than I ever have in my whole life.
No better guidance. I mean, that's where we all came from. That's that absolute that we all came from. That's the silent voice that is talking to everybody. But we have a very confined mind with 50 to whatever 80,000 thoughts a day. It's like that story of the teacher and the students just excited about something new, and the teacher's pouring a cup of tea, and the tea starts overflowing, and the student's like, "Hey, well, that's good. We're good. And he's like, "How do you expect me to teach you anything new when your cup is full?"
Right.
We got to empty the cup. We got to get a bigger cup. We got to empty the cup.
Yeah.
And that expansion of awareness, given our minds those 50,000 thoughts, at least a little bit more space to bounce around so they don't come back as quickly. Something new can come in, so a coach can help, so a teacher can be heard, so you can hear the spirit of God, the consciousness source, whatever it is that's trying to talk to you. Because I haven't skipped across anyone who hasn't had some other type of voice or some other type of synchronicity or some other type of story like how I saw you, that is just so blatant in the universe trying to talk to you. It's hard to be skeptical about that. It's hard to just turn that away and say, "Oh, that's a cute coincidence."
Right.
It gets louder and louder and louder, and that dark side is getting louder and louder with TV and marketing and ads, and we're not built to take in everything that's happening right now. So we've got to find the time for meditation or prayer to expand our awareness, or to sit back and listen. Yeah. The more quieter you become, the more you hear.
Yeah, I think that's like the best thing, right? I say in the start of our classes, we all stand heart centered, look at your hands, slow down your breathing. And at the end of class, we bow out, and I think that it's like, man, how do we stop those 80,000 thoughts, that repetitive thought, that sympathetic overdrive that society is demanding of us, from marketing to scrolling to just how busy everything is. And I think that causes a lot of hypertension, you know? And I think one of the easiest things to be able to deal with that hyperintention, like you're talking about, is just close your eyes and get into your breathing, you know. And as you fart, when you shut your eyes down, your optics mellow out. So you get into that thing, slow, rhythmic breathing, and when you get a slow rhythm of your breath, then your heart starts to mellow out. And when your heart mellows out, your brainwave starts to mellow out. So a slow and consistent breathing pattern creates a slower and consistent heartbeat, and a slower and consistent heartbeat starts to create slower and more consistent brain waves. And then you just go to that space where you're breathing and you just listen, because you can't listen and think at the same time. And you just get into that space where you're listening. And that really helps everything start to slow down. And for me, that's where I find God, right? When I'm praying, I'm asking for, I'm giving thanks. I'm you know, that's it. I'm asking, I'm giving thanks, those kind of things. But when I'm in meditation, I'm listening, and I'm listening for the answers of those things that I'm praying about. And that's how I start to like get into that space. And, you know, I think one of the last things to kind of tie together a lot that we've been talking about is that first vision at 22 years old. I didn't know who came to me and guided me and showed me the things that I was being shown at 22 years old. I had another experience like that happen to me in my late 20s, right? And then I at 30, maybe I was 39 years old, I did ayahuasca. And I was ill, I was injured, my career was about to be over. I just needed some guidance into the next space of my life. And in my ayahuasca journey, I was running like a lion, and then I turned into an eagle, and I flew up and I got into my brain and moved around. And then I met Source, right? And I was like, what am I doing here? He's like, what do you want to ask me? You know? And I was like, who are you? And this source of energy was like, I'm God. And I was like, huh? You know, in ayahuasca, you only know if you've done it, you know? And this God source was like, what do you want to know? How can I help you? And I was like, wow, that's the being that guided me when I was 22 years old in my, and that's always the source. I use the memory of those experiences to get back there when I pray and meditate.
Mm-hmm.
And
And that,
I have never shared that. I've
well,
shared that with my wife, but you know, I
so
haven't tied that together like that for very many people, if any, besides my wife.
good, good. That's what the world needs to hear, because what you remember the movie Contact with Jodie Foster?
I did never see it. No.
It was the back in the 80s. Some aliens came. They needed to build a structure so that they could better understand the world, the universe, and they built this multi-billion-dollar structure. And she did this device, and she got blueprints for it. And it was about scientists and very religious people, and very scientific people. And they dropped this ball through, and it just all the world saw was this ball drop through this machine, split second. But at the end of the movie, it ends with them having 18 hours of static, right? So but about 20 minutes of it is her experiencing what this machine did. And she goes to out of body experience. She goes to a place and she sees her dad. And she asked a question, and her dad said, this is what we create so that you as a human can feel safe, can be okay with us trying to talk to you. You saw that being, you saw source through ayahuasca. Other people see angels, other people will see God, other people will see entities, whatever it is. It's whatever is most comfortable for that human's mind's conditioning, so they can feel safe in something that is just so different than the human experience. And the one thing that I always talk about, because I love when you share these stories and others share these stories, it's all coming from the same source.
Yeah.
Every religion is different, but it's talking about the same thing. Every experience, every out of body experience, near death experience, hearing a voice, seeing something, seeing a different dimension, whatever it is, it's all coming from the same source, and it's going to be seen for what is most comfortable to you. And that being that helped you at 22, you maybe were in a different mindset. It was a different being. It was in a different shape, a different form. You did ayahuasca at a much more wise time in your life. You saw source. It's all the same thing. It's all as
Yeah.
real as it gets. It's all another experience, just like driving a car or having food or getting married. It's just something that we don't speak about commonly. So we
Right.
think it's different or crazy or woo woo or out there or something's wrong. No, it's all coming from the same source. And I
Right.
very much appreciate you sharing that, because more people need to hear that. Because when people hear that, maybe they'll feel more safe sharing. They won't feel like something's wrong or they're crazy or their mind's going insane, because there's so much going on right now in this world that more and more people are being spoken to, and they're gauging it as something is mentally wrong with me. I get it. It's too much stress. No, it's source. It's an angel. It's a being trying to help. They're
Yeah.
really trying to help, and they're trying to talk to us more. And by someone like you sharing your story, it's allowing more people to feel more comfortable with what they're experiencing. So I very much appreciate that.
Yeah. Of course. I think Evan Tanner, um,
That boy had some experiences.
UFC world champion, and he used to come and live with me, and me and him became very good friends because these are the conversations we would have. And I've missed Evan since he passed away because of those conversations we would have, and what he called it was the power of one, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't
Remember that.
matter who you are, what you are, the power of one, and we all have that ability to be able to access it, and it's why I don't say, my martial arts philosophy is a lot like my politics and my religion. And in martial arts, I don't say I'm a boxer. I don't say I'm a kickboxer. I don't say I'm jujitsu. I say I'm a mixed martial artist. I want to take everything that I can that makes me a better fighter, right? And what makes me a better fighter wouldn't be the same thing that makes you a better fighter, because maybe you have a longer reach. Maybe you see things different. So I just have to take everything that works for me, and then I leave what doesn't work. And that's the way I approach my politics too. Is like, it's not one side or the other. I take different things, and I have my own thoughts on the political world, and the same thing with religion. I think I got a lot of good stuff from the Mormons. I like things I hear about from the Muslims. I think that the Catholics, these things, But what I don't do is I don't say I'm a Mormon. I don't say I'm a Christian, because I don't like to label myself in a way that separates me from anybody else.
There you go.
Because I think that power of one and that same source you're talking about is something that we can all access within ourselves.
Yes.
And I don't think that matters whether you're white, black, Asian, Muslim, American, Italian, it's what you said, it's the same source. And I think that our hope as for a future, especially for the next generation, for my children, is for more people to learn to be able to tap into that source that's within us, that's in everything. Right?
And that's the great thing about the natural occurrence of consciousness. Just like a 44-year-old turning 45, we didn't need a teacher. We didn't. It just 365 days go by, you get older. That's the natural occurrence of this planet, consciousness, awakening, how we better understand, and it's allowing more people to understand what you're saying, because that's the whole point of this book, of this podcast. Truth has no sides. We are the only ones that divide each other. We are the only ones that think a Republican is an idiot and a Democrat's right, and vice versa. We're the only ones that are ignorant to thinking a Catholic knows and an atheist doesn't.
Right.
It's all coming from the same source, and it blows me away how divided and conflicted we still are. And we're not talking
Right.
about ignorant people. We're talking about people with 160, 170, 180 IQs who do 2-hour YouTubes that get seen by 20 million people, and all they do is argue with each other, as if that's
Right.
Very intelligent people just arguing and debating. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Which
Josh,
is another whole nother topic, but it's by design. And
yes,
the answer is to come together, right? The answer is is in unity, and hopefully we can find that through exactly what you're talking about, right? Like one source that doesn't separate us, like that's the unique tie, is that essence is in all of us.
and I think again that's naturally what's happening, and that's why so many are latching on to their side more aggressively, because they can feel the pull to a more middle, to a more understanding, to a more, yeah, maybe the other side isn't wrong, and that scares the living shit out of most people. So
Yeah,
that's why
scares people. What if your construct that you've created in your
your
cage to
entire
make you
life
safe is
goes.
being destroyed?
Yep, it's terrifying.
Yeah, terrifying to people, and especially terrifying to people who don't have courage. The more fragile you are, the more terrifying that is, and the
Yes,
more that you have to stand up and defend it. And we're seeing a lot of that now. For me, it's entertaining, and I hope it takes us to a better place as a society as a whole.
it will. That's just naturally how it does. Whatever
Right.
the story you've told for the past hour and 15 minutes is exactly what everyone else goes through, just with different experiences. It's exactly what the earth's going through. It's exactly what the system's going through, consciousness is going through. It's all the same thing. There's 8 billion paths to God, or 8 billion paths up the mountain. And they look different, but they're all headed to the same spot.
Many different paths to the top.
Yep.
Awesome, brother.
Well, one other thing, and it's a question I ask everyone at the end. What is truth to you?
Truth to me, I think that truth is also a construct, right? Like, because things that have been proven to be true, or that we thought were true, or we thought that were religion, often crumble. Like Zeus was they were the gods, and that was the truth, and it was how you managed your life, and I don't know. I think truth is also always changing, right? And I think that what it goes back to is authenticity, right? I think that you have to know your truth, right? You have to know what your truth is and what your purpose is. And then I think right doing starts to help you live your truth. And living your truth is being able to be authentically you. And I think that's the gift of truth, right? I think that the truth is open, and I think the truth is honest. I think that things that are having to be hidden or be covered up, I think those things are evil. And I think that the truth is open and honest and natural, right? And I think it's more authentic. And I hope that people can find when we talk about what is truth, I hope people can find their truth so that they can live authentic and let their guards down to just be a little bit more connected to everybody else. I think that's, without having this thought of before I come on of what truth is, I think that's where it ties. And I think that if you find your truth, you find your purpose, it lines you to authenticity. And I think that living that leads us to that true source, that hopefully guides us all into a better place.
Beautiful. I always like everyone's answer. It's always different.
Right.
Well, after a life of being out front and having what you did, knowing that right now you're kind of living more behind the scenes and not doing podcasts, thank you for making an exception with this, because it's something that there's a lot of stuff I didn't know about you, and there's a lot of stuff that people are going to hear that will give them the courage to talk about their stuff, to at least acknowledge it and not fear it and not think anything is wrong with them. So thank you for the time, Josh. It was great
Yeah,
catching up with you, and I'll see you in
right.
about 3 or 4 years on accident
Right.
again.
Run into each other somewhere. I bet it happens sooner. I bet we run into each other now.
I'm sure it
So,
will. I'm sure it will. But thank you again.